Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now today we're testing the performance of Atomfall on my RTX 4060 gaming PC. It's paired with a Ryzen 5 7400F and 32 gigs of 5600MHz DDR5. This is the Game Pass version. Let's read a bit of the game's description from the official site. A survival action game inspired by real life events, Atomfall is set 5 years after the Windscale nuclear disaster in northern England. Explore the fictional quarantine zone, scavenge, craft, to fight and talk your way through a British countryside, setting filled with bizarre characters, mysticism, cults and rogue government agencies. Being British myself, it's always interesting to see the island represented in video games. There's certainly a few places I visited that I've thought could do with quarantining, and my local pub on a Friday night is definitely home to a few mutants, but in all seriousness, the idea of an alternate history adventure with a twist on real events set in England is like an ideal concept to me. I'm way too early on in the game to give you any real impressions, but I can give you an idea of how this runs on fairly modest modern hardware. I always try and test pretty early stages of games in videos like this to avoid major plot spoilers. To start with then, let's talk settings. There's no DLSS or FSR here, at least at the time of upload. There is a resolution scaling option which can be set between 50 and 200% to either run at a lower than native or higher than native and downsampled res, but that's it. Other options might be added later, who knows, but I'm not really bothered because this runs really well. We start off inside a bunker, and here at Ultra the game is hitting over 200 FPS on occasion with a 6-core CPU and 8GB 4060. Sure, things won't stay this high, but most of the time we still get at least 100 FPS with the highest settings, or at least that's certainly not an uncommon figure to achieve with this setup. The only thing I disabled was motion blur as a personal preference. There were a couple of intensive combat scenes with multiple enemies and fire effects on screen that caused drops to the high 70s, low 80s momentarily, but so far, so good. What I will say though is that the anti-aliasing isn't all that great even with the highest settings, and especially when looking at grass. The grass itself doesn't actually look too good anyway. You may be able to pick it up in the video, but I have to say I do prefer a few jagged edges to a blurry smearing effect that some games implement with their anti-aliasing solutions. Jagged edges and flickering become less apparent at higher resolutions, so we'll switch to 1440p momentarily. First though, let's talk about the on-screen stats. It's clear that this game is more GPU intensive with this pairing, so this modern 6-core Ryzen chip, one of the weakest of the new AM5 lineup, is more than adequate for the job. The 4060 was pretty much pinned at 99% utilization all of the time, with the 7400F hanging back at around 20 to 25%. For comparison's sake, some games like Cyberpunk 2077 or Starfield, to name a couple of examples, will be CPU limited in some areas by a modern 6-core like this, even with a 4060. Atomfall is not. We're getting the absolute most out of this card, pretty much all of the time. Moving on to 1440p now, and while our GPU has extra strain on it, it still handles the game very well. I'd suggest dropping to high, like I've done here, for at least 60 FPS at 2560 by 1440, just to eliminate more frequent performance drops. Visually, it isn't too dissimilar though. That is the high settings compared to Ultra. The 4060 is very much a 1080p card for a lot of game releases today, so it's nice to see it comfortably handling 1440p at native res without the need for upscaling, which we don't have anyway here. This is just refreshing, all round actually. A cool concept, respectable visuals and decent performance on lower cost hardware. It's something we don't see or haven't seen that much of over the last couple of years. Now the 4060 isn't exactly what I'd call a budget card, in my opinion, when you compare that to what the word meant a few years ago, but it is a card that doesn't always guarantee decent performance with modern games at native resolutions. I'd say however that it does a solid job here. Sure, maybe medium would have been the better call, but averaging over 90 FPS at high here is certainly a good result. I then wanted to try 4K, which is never ideal for a card like this. You're probably going to want 60 FPS as well, or at least I would, considering that this is a first-person title. If you're happy with 30, then you could probably maintain a higher preset, but 60 plus FPS requires the low graphical options. The game definitely gets a noticeable visual reduction at these settings, and there are still a few drops below 60, but overall I think it did alright. Texture quality isn't brilliant even at the highest setting, and up close things look pretty basic and smooth, so when you turn it down to low, there are certainly some objects that remind you that you are using low textures. To be honest though, that's what low settings should be. There isn't always enough of a difference between visual quality presets these days, and I think that's partly why performance differences can be minimal as well. Here it's like, right, you want low, you'll get low, and you'll get more performance for it. Simple. Don't forget there's no need to stick to presets either. I do it for the sake of simplicity when testing performance, but the beauty of PC gaming is that we can just adjust individual options to suit individual performance preferences. You might want to set a few things to medium, a few things to low, a few things to high, and perhaps a few things to ultra. It's well worth playing about with different options, but one thing I know for sure is that the 4060 is going to handle Atomfall rather quite well, at least from what I've seen at this point in the game, and I'd like to remind you of course that I am still pretty early on, so things may be subject to change, but for my first impressions performance wise, yeah, I'm pretty pleased. The same can be said for my initial impressions for Atomfall as a game. I think it's really good from what I've seen so far. I might just be biased because of the setting and what is probably quite a unique story concept, to be honest. Hopefully this video helps you out anyway. I will have more GPU tests with this game soon, if you want to see them of course. I'll probably do the usual iGPU or integrated graphics testing with it as well, and I think we'll go down the rung of GPUs to see how low we can go in terms of maintaining perhaps a plus 30 and plus 60 FPS average, because it's not often, as I say, that we get a game that runs nicely at native res on more affordable hardware these days. I definitely recommend checking this out. It's on Game Pass as well, so if you have a Game Pass subscription, you want to try it, you don't want to pay full price for the game because you're paying the Game Pass subscription, then it's well worth downloading. Comes in at around 60 something gigs if I recall correctly. I actually just double check that. Let's go to manage files. Oh yes, so 65.88 gigabytes at launch day here, version 1.2.28.0 as well. I installed this and tested it on launch day, so of course things are subject to change in terms of potential file size and performance, but as for this one, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this one. Leave your thoughts down below. Atomfall's well worth a play in my opinion. Thanks again, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.